To VM Underground. My name is Teresa Miller. I'm a principal technologist with Cohesity, and I have a topic for you today that hopefully will inspire you to try something new. So today we're going to talk about pushing beyond your comfort zone, advancing your career in tech through public speaking. Now, interesting fact, public speaking, of course there are many lists out there, but according to one that the Washington Post did, public speaking is actually one of the top fears in the world, which I found pretty interesting because that's ahead of bugs, that's ahead of ghosts, that's ahead of heights and many other things. So public speaking is definitely one of those things, though, that can advance your career. So before we dive in any further, one of the things I wanted to share with you is a little story about how I got started in public speaking. About 7 years ago, I was working in an enterprise doing admin work. As my background here suggests, I've dealt a lot with the Microsoft space, Citrix space, and VMware space over the years. I was an admin, senior level admin, doing lots of fantastic architectural projects. I was looking for a way, I think we all do, right? We love our conferences to learn new things. I was looking for a way to learn a little bit more about Citrix, but I didn't necessarily want to go to Citrix Synergy that year. So I started poking around and I went to a website for an industry event called BriForum. And at the time, it appeared I was way too early. And so what I found, though, was a call for papers. And I was like, what is this? So I read a little bit about it, went on my way, and thought about it for a few days. Then I realized we'd done some pretty fantastic projects at work. I was working in a 15,000 seat enterprise. We were doing Active Directory upgrades. We did some major upgrades to our Citrix environment, deployed some test app, just had redeployed vSphere to support our environment. So I submitted. I went back a few days later and I submitted. And lo and behold, when they did the final notices in terms of who was selected, by some chance I was. And that has actually kicked off and really kick-started where I am at today. I don't think that I would have the job that I have if I hadn't taken that leap and tried something new 7 years ago. So let's dive in a little bit more in terms of today's topic. So why in the world would you want to learn public speaking? We're going to dive into that in some greater depth momentarily. I'm going to talk to you about finding speaking opportunities, ways to get started and try. What do you do when you're selected to speak? What is that process? What do you need to work through? And we're going to take a look at some speaking tips. So let's take a look here. So why learn public speaking? I talked about my story. I honestly wouldn't have the job I do today without it. But even if that's not your goal, here are some things to think about. It's a way to challenge yourself, overcome that fear. We talked about how that's one of the number one fears and how that can help with your professional improvement. Think about this. The preparation that goes into a speech means that you have to work out and effectively communicate with others. So you can take this stuff to your meetings at work. The things that we talk about today can be turned into other opportunities to stand out with your employer. Also, every presentation doesn't come without some research. You do have to spend some time learning new things. We don't know everything. And so improving your knowledge through that research can also go a long way within your current employer, your career, in your daily life, and more. And learning to speak confidently in meetings, promoting your ideas, and promoting yourself professionally can help you advance in your career as well, regardless of your goals. And then if leadership is something that's on your mind and something you'd love to do, It can also help with leadership development. So how do you find speaking opportunities? Let's take a closer look. These are some of the things that I've learned. So one, you found out I started speaking. Actually, I was speaking at conferences before I even had a website. So I do have a website, 24/7 IT Connection. Have some great content. So definitely check that out if that's interesting to you. But basically, you need to look for those call for papers. You're going to need a catchy title and abstract that's concise to support whatever it is you want to teach your audience. So here I'm going to share a few. So this one in particular was one that I did at VMworld last year. And so Dirty Deeds Done Cheap, a guide to BCDR. So tapping into the AC/DC theme, but talking about business continuity and disaster recovery. I had a ton of fun with it, pulled some AC/DC images into it, and had a really great talk with the audience. The practical guide to backing up your hybrid cloud environment. So this one in particular was done at Microsoft Ignite last year, and was also a very interesting and engaging conversation. The IT Burnout State of the Industry panel. I did this one at Ignite, but my team and I did a similar one also at VMworld last year. And this one was also done at Ignite last year. It was the MVP Guide to Office 365 Security Exchange Online Edition. You'll notice all of these also had abstracts. You're going to have to summarize what you're going to talk about in a concise way. And actually that process alone also transcends and transfers really well into being able to speak a clear message, even at work, just working through this. And I know in the beginning, when I was working through this, and actually even sometimes still today, I run this past somebody else or seek help in coming up with something that might be catchy enough to draw attention. It's not that you have to work on an island to accomplish these things. You can definitely leverage your resources and support groups. So how do you find speaking opportunities if this is something that you're getting excited about doing or thinking about? So one of the easiest things is to just raise your hand and volunteer to present at work. I'm seeing more and more people do this, even in my workplace. More and more different people are taking that opportunity to give it a try. Speaking opportunities can come from networking with others. So many of you are hanging out in Discord today, or you're out on Twitter and social. LinkedIn is another opportunity. Since we're all remote, we're not in person, but you can find a lot of speaking opportunities just by networking with others. Perhaps you could leverage a mentoring program. I'm actually a mentor and founder of the Citrix user group Women in Tech Mentoring Program. We've been able to excel those that are interested into platforms that allow them to give this a try on a larger scale. So if you are part of a mentoring program, or actually, we're still actually seeking mentees for the Citrix user group, Women in Tech one, feel free to reach out. You could volunteer to speak at a local meetup. I know these are coming in many different shapes and forms at the moment. Some are virtual, some are actually trying in person. I've seen some of that over in Europe. Some of my peers over there have shared some fantastic images. Of course, people are social distancing and wearing masks, but volunteer. You could start a podcast. Actually, this is another thing that I did shortly after that initial speaking engagement with an industry peer of mine. We've done it on and off over the years. Actually, it is currently running. It's called Current Status. But I can promise you that the early podcasts, if you go back and watch them, they're not perfect. And actually, even still, sometimes they're not. But that's the beauty of a podcast. You can give it a try. Social media, I did touch on this a little bit already because we're in that virtual world. reach out. There's a ton of social going on with VMworld alone. Take advantage of that and find some opportunities as you leave to speak. So you found that big speaking opportunity, that way to try things out. What do? So as you're putting together your presentation, remember that you are telling a story, even if it's deep technical. My very first presentation was called Citrix Synapse Back to Basics. And it was all the things that we learned that we could do natively in a better way. It was like the best practices of how that application worked. So when I had to sit down and figure out how to do this, I had to keep in mind that there was a story being told. Why did we do it? How did we do it? And what the takeaways were for the audience in terms of how they could execute on it as well. So setting up your expectations up front, you saw me do that today. We did an overview. We're following that overview. And as we round things out in a little while, you'll see that I have some takeaways for you. Remember that the story should teach your audience something. This presentation is not about you. You may have noticed I spent very little time talking about me and how I got to where I'm at today. We talked about my first speaking opportunity, but there was very little about me because this presentation is about you and your career growth. So this story should teach your audience something technical or soft skills or something else completely different. Make sure they're going to learn something. And then always include real world connections on the topic. So I've shared some of mine and I'll continue to. I have other things that I think would benefit for you today, and we're going to talk about them. So continuing down this journey, you're selected to speak. Now, what do? Well, I can tell you, I still do this, but that very first time when I was overcoming that hurdle, right? I was excited I was selected, but now there's like nerves kicking in and I have to figure out how to navigate this. So the first thing I did was went out and found old presentations from that conference to see how people were speaking, to see the level of depth they went into in their presentations. And even sometimes you can find feedback around the particular speakers, but I took time to do this. You're going to want to finish your slide deck early, especially when you're starting out. I think as you progress through your career, you may not need to finish it, say, like 2 months ahead of time, but always have it done early. I know the very first time I spoke, I actually did have it done like 8 weeks early because I needed to make sure someone else was going to review it for me. I still do this. I always have someone review my presentations. They're going to catch little things like grammar. They're going to catch if something doesn't quite make sense in the storyline. They're going to give me feedback and I'm going to adjust and make sure that it's helpful to the audience I'll be presenting to. The other thing I'm a huge fan of is practicing and even memorizing. From the Microsoft side, Satya is not going to get up on stage without practicing. Pat this week, Pat Gelsinger with VMware, he didn't go into this blind. He practiced before he got up there. So take the time to practice and memorize, and then just kind of going back in time. So of course, the first time is always the hardest. I had my presentation done early. I would literally stand in my basement in a quiet place and practice. I practiced just about once a day, every weekend for a couple of hours leading into that event. I recorded it, I reviewed it, and even at one point, because I felt like I was ready to have that feeling of an audience, but not quite ready for a person when I was practicing, I even grabbed a bunch of my kids' stuffed toys, and I did the presentation for them. So you do what it takes to make sure you feel comfortable, which will tie into something I talk about shortly. We talked about recording your practice, and I've already reiterated this, right? Practice more. And here's the other thing. It's okay to be nervous. It just means you care. I know, especially when I'm presenting in person, I still get those initial butterflies and nerves. Little different when you're behind a camera like you are now. It's not as propelled for me, but it is okay to be nervous. So let's talk about some of those speaking tips that I promised to bring to you today. So in terms of speaking tips for in-person presentations, you want to know your content. Like, that's why you practice. If you have that content down, you know what you're going to talk about, it actually does help cut through those nerves. It also helps you emanate the confidence that you need to be in front of that group. That confidence shows your audience that you did plan, you did prepare, and maybe something you're sharing can be taken seriously and leveraged back in their work environment. You're going to want to speak clearly and loud enough. So of course, in virtual, this is a little different. I have a full slide here for you on the virtual element. So when you're in person, I actually have a totally different speaking voice. It is much louder. I have presented in expo halls, on stages. You always have people, you always have background noise, and even with a microphone, you do need to make sure you're speaking clearly and loud enough. Oh, and the other important thing to consider too is your audience could be international. I suspect many of you are today. You know, this virtual event is going round the clock in many cases, and so some of you may be ending your day and you're translating, because maybe English isn't your first language. So another reason to be as clear and as loud as you can be. Wear what makes you feel comfortable. This applies to everybody. So when you're thinking about the in-person speaking, I have seen anything from presenters in t-shirts and jeans and bare feet. There is a Microsoft MVP. She always wears bright colored leggings, no matter what, no matter who the audience, that's what she's comfortable in. My team did a presentation last year at Gartner and chose to theme it around the Men in Black theme. So they showed up in their suits, their black suits, and their sunglasses to get that point across. And one other example, an industry peer of mine, when we were traveling, anytime she would speak in Orlando, she would find a dress that had a print that aligned with Disney. So for example, she had a very classy Minnie Mouse print dress that she would wear every time she was in Orlando. So you wear what makes you feel comfortable, so you're not thinking about your clothing. It also helps with that confidence. When you're in person, you're going to want to move around, whether you're confined to a stage or a platform, or if you can get down in the audience, depending on the venue you're in, move around. It does keep people paying attention. And in person, ask the audience questions. It does also help get them engaged. You can do this vocally, or you can do this through a tool set, which I've done both. Be sure to interact with the audience, and that can mean many different things, right? That could be Q&A at the end. I already talked about getting down and even walking through the audience if the venue and space is conducive to that. Interact in whatever way makes sense for that event and venue. And most of all, have fun. Teaching somebody something new is fun, so enjoy it. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the virtual presentations. Of course, there's going to be some overlap here. The first thing you're going to see again is know your content. You don't want to show up without knowing mostly what you're going to talk about. You still want to be confident, and that comes from that practice. Be sure to look at your camera. I'm doing the best I can today. I know it's not perfect. You'll find the same. You'll find the same experience because it's actually more natural when you're presenting to look all over the place, right? Make eye contact with your audience. And when you're virtual, you don't quite get that. So you do your best to look at the camera. Record if appropriate. I've seen both. Both options seem to work well. This today, of course, is live. I felt that this in particular, especially if you have questions, which please do put into StreamYard. If you have questions, please put them in there. We'll get to them toward the end. But this type of presentation I felt was more important to get your real-time insights and questions. However, a lot of VMworld this week or Ignite last week was pre-recorded. There's a lot of producing that happens, and recording can make sense when you have so many moving parts. Your lighting is important. I'm going to actually show you real quick because I know I'm on screen. I have a ring light in my office, and you're going to see in a second what a difference it makes. So light off, I probably look like I'm sitting in a dungeon right now, although I have great lighting in my office. But having that light just in front of my monitor, as you can see, makes a huge difference in how I appear on screen. Sound and audio quality also are important. Since the pandemic, I went out and bought a boom arm. I didn't have one. I just had my Audio Technica sitting on my desk on a stand. That actually does eliminate some of the vibrations, for example. And other people, if you just look around social, there are other things that you can do, even equalizers and such. I haven't gone to that extreme because overall, the feedback I get is that my audio quality is generally pretty good with the investment that I did make. Your camera, I think many of you went out and probably bought cameras with the pandemic, but make sure if you're going to be presenting that it is a 1080p webcam. My webcams were outdated, and of course I got stuck in that situation where I had a really hard time finding a good 1080p because they were all bought up. But at this point, I have been successful, and that's what I'm using today. If you're doing a live session like we are today, it may be worthwhile to do a tech check your internet speeds, make sure everything is going to come through loud and clear for your audience. All right, so we're getting close to rounding things out. So if I didn't want this to be just about me, so I had tips for you, but I reached out to the community, the IT community, to get other tips for those of you getting started with speaking. So this one here is from Martina Grom. She says to smile. Don't go over your time. And this is especially important in person, is always repeat that audience question because they're not always going to have had a microphone to ask you that. So you do need to repeat it over your mic for the rest of the audience. Gina Rosenthal, she is also a huge advocate for practice, right? Write down what you are going to say, practice it, practice your pace, your pauses, and how you want to say your words. Lori, she says, don't assume that everyone knows everything, and be confident in your knowledge, even if it's a topic that the audience knows a lot about. So for example, I do suspect that a lot of you are speakers, but hopefully many of you aren't. And regardless of who you are, the goal was to at least teach you something, right? So hopefully you learned something today. Joe, she says to practice in front of somebody that will tally how often you say is a tough one. I just did it right there for you. So is another one that's common. And it is something that I personally could work on. It does happen. You're not going to hear some of the more rehearsed, like keynote presentations. They have their ums fully removed, but it is something you can work on, and I will personally keep working on as well. This is fantastic too, and really great advice. You are the only one that knows the script for the presentation. So if you do end up improvising a little, it's okay. Don't sweat it. Nobody knew that you went off script a little. We have just a few more. Choose topics that others ask you about often. So this really applies to when you're doing those call for speakers and call for papers. Get in there, and if people are asking you about something, others want to know about it too. So this is some great advice from Liz. Also, when you're getting asked questions about that topic, turn the tables, ask them some questions as well. It does actually add to the variety of the topic that you're presenting on. And be confident. You are the expert. Another tip from Christina, where we talk about how the presentation maybe doesn't go as you had planned. So when it doesn't, don't stress. She's personally been too hard on herself until somebody told her. The audience didn't know what your plans were to begin with, so it's okay. And Heather, she says to also practice. Theater performers, TED Talk speakers, they all take time to rehearse. Practice on your feet, practice in motion for confidence building. And that pre-presentation prep is just as important as the presentation itself. So what are my key takeaways for you today? So one, if you are interested in advancing your career in a way that's different than you've pursued thus far, seek opportunities. Don't wait. Don't wait for somebody to tap your shoulder. You may be waiting forever. Find ways to get in there and do what you want to do. Remember, you are telling a story, whether it's a technical story, whether it's a PowerShell presentation or a Kubernetes presentation, or a story about how you deployed a major infrastructure or anything else. You're telling a story. So just like our English teachers always taught us, intro, body, conclusion. When we're writing papers, your story's going to have the same format. Your goal for the audience is to learn something. Be sure to review other presentations and review your own. It is worth the effort. You actually learn from others just by reviewing their presentations as well. And practice. Like Mom always said, practice does make perfect. It really does help, again, emanate that confidence and show that you are the expert. So that is all I have for today. I thank you so much for joining me. And I'm not sure there are any questions. Like I said, I'm not in Discord. So I think I'm just reaching out to my other, let's see what we have here. Fantastic. All right. So we don't have any questions today. So as you process what we talked about, please feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on Twitter at 24/7 IT Connect, or if you just want to connect in general, even if you don't have any questions, that's fantastic. Always love meeting new people, especially in this virtual era we're in. So thank you all, and have a fantastic rest of your VM world.